Are you in the market for a 650 dual sport bike? And are you considering the Kawasaki KLR650 or the Honda XR650L? In this video, I'm going to share the 8 things that I love about the XR650L over the Kawasaki KLR650. Hi, I'm Francois from AdventureBikeTroop.com, and in this video, I want to chat about the 8 things that I love about my Honda XR650L over my old Kawasaki KLR650. Now, both of these bikes are 650 thumpers. They can both go off-road, they can both ride on the road. The XR is more dirt biased, whereas the KLR is more of an adventure bike, but they can both be used for touring long distance. I've done many thousands of kilometers on my KLR650 over the years. I've had 2, the C model and the A model, and we've toured for 2-3 weeks at a time with all our luggage, sometimes 2 up, and it was a great bike for that. XR650L, I haven't done a long tour with it, but I've seen many people doing tours of months long through the Sahara Desert, through the Americas, so both bikes can do both things fairly well. But in this video, I want to share my experience with the XR650L and what I like about the bike over the KLR. Now, I've done a similar video on the 8 things that I loved about my KLR over the XR. You can check it up here somewhere. Now, I have been a bit critical about the XR650L here on YouTube. In some of my videos, I've made a video on the 11 things you need to consider before buying one. You can check it out somewhere. But there are a lot of things that's positive, and this is what I want to share in this video. Now, before we continue, don't get me wrong. Both bikes are awesome bikes. These are just small little things that if you want to buy the bike, or you want to know more about the bike before you buy one or go look at one, or if you want to just know what to look out for when you go look at the bikes, this is just to give you some ideas. So it's not meant to bash any of these bikes. I mean, I love both, and I would happily have both of these bikes. If I can find a Gen 1 for a good price, I'll actually buy it. So both are awesome bikes. These are just things that you might want to know if you consider buying these bikes. So here we go. Now, the first thing that I love about the Honda XR650L over the KLR650 is the torque. Now, the torque and the power specs are more or less the same. They are both 650 single-cylinder dual sports, but the way that the torque is delivered, the XR650L delivers the torque way low, so much lower than the rev range, and you can really feel it. If you open the throttle, there's a real punch from the engine that you don't feel on the KLR650. Especially if you rejet it and open up the air box and put in a foam filter, which I did. It's still the stock exhaust though. And I did similar mods on the KLR. The KLR has less of a punch low down, but it revs higher. So on the highway, it runs out of breath later than the XR650L. But for me, the way I ride at 100 kilometers per hour or 60 miles per hour on the highway, there's still a lot of punch from this motor in 5th gear, so not a problem. But it's really noticeable when you ride slow in the dirt. The XR really is more fun on acceleration. Now, the second thing that I love about the XR650L is that it's much lighter than the KLR650. Woo! Now, I never complained about my KLR's weight. I dropped it a whole lot of times, especially with our luggage, and it wasn't that difficult to pick up. I always picked it up on my own, but when I got on the XR, I immediately noticed the big weight difference. I don't know exactly how much lighter. I'll put it up on the screen, but it definitely feels much lighter. I think it's 346 pounds wet weight, and I've dropped it a couple of times trying to do funny stuff in the dirt, and it's easy to pick up on my own without even using a funny technique or anything. So yeah, and if you jump, not that I jump, but if you go over bumps, it definitely feels lighter than the heavy KLR. Now, an interesting side note is that the the previous model CRF250L Rally is exactly the same weight as the 650. So that shows you how light the 650 really is. I mean, it's a very primitive bike. It's not a lightweight bike, but compared to the competition or the other bikes in this class, it definitely is a light bike. The number 3 that I like about the XR650L over the Kawasaki KLR650 is that the valve clearances are very easy to adjust. With the KLR, you have shims, so if there is a clearance that you need to adjust, you have to get some shims or have it made, and it could be difficult to find depending on where you are, or you have to buy the whole kit. It's just more fiddly, whereas the XR, you just need a screwdriver and a wrench, ring spanner, and you can adjust it very quickly. It took me about 10 minutes to do all 4 valves. So it's just a lock nut that you loosen, you adjust the valve clearance with the screwdriver, and you tighten the lock nut again, and you're done. I love that about the XR, especially if you go on a long trip. If you go on a 15,000 kilometer trip, like our trip through Africa for 3 months, we want to set the valve clearance along the way, then it is really useful not to have to deal with shims. Now it seems with all these old 650s or dual sport bikes, even the 400 DRZ Suzuki, with all these bikes that have been in production for 20, 30 years, there's always some problem that they haven't fixed over the years, some Achilles heel. So the 4th thing that I love about the XR650L over the KLR650 is that the XR's Achilles heel is easy to fix. It's outside of the engine. So with the KLR650, the problem is the doohickey. It's the balancer's chain tension system, that lever, that is a problem. So you have to open half the engine. You have to take the side case off and the flywheel, etc., to get to the doohickey. So it's not a difficult job, but you need special tools, and it takes quite a bit of time and effort to replace the doohickey. Whereas the Honda's Achilles heel is the countershaft and the countershaft sprocket. The stock sprocket is very thin. The contact area with the shaft is 8.5 millimeters, and if you don't maintain it properly, so if you don't grease it, the splines, and you don't maintain the chain tension, if you run it too tight, and because there's no push drive, it wears the countershaft, and on many bikes the wear is excessive and quite early on with low mileage. But it's a simple, just replace it with a different sprocket, a thicker sprocket. There's loads of aftermarket sprockets. I'll link some below, like the Fritzko, and you can also fit an XR650R sprocket, which I did. I've got a video on that as well. But it's an easy fix, it's a cheap fix, and you can do it when you get your new bike or as soon as you get the bike. Even if there's some wear, you can still prevent it from wearing faster with a thicker sprocket. So it's an easier fix than the KLR's doohickey. The 5th thing that I love about the XR650L over the KLR650 is that it's got better suspension. It's got longer travel suspension. It's adjustable at both ends, but in the front you've got the air valves. The KLR has that as well, but for the KLR, like most bikes in this class, it's just to equalize the air in the shock, in the forks, with altitude. Whereas with the XR, you can actually pump it up for more preload, I think. But anyways, you can pump it up to adjust the suspension. And the XR is just, I've seen people do silly jumps with the XR and land it without totally bottoming out. With my KLR, I had to rebuild the suspension after about 20,000 miles. It wouldn't stand on the side stand with luggage anymore. It fell over to the other side. But it wasn't an expensive fix. I also put in progressive front springs in the KLR, which made it better. But the XR is just better from factory. So the 6th thing that I love about the XR over the KLR650 is that it's air cooled. Now, I know in the KLR video I mentioned that I like the KLR for being liquid cooled versus air cooled. Well, after having the bike for a bit and doing some research, I actually like the air cooled. It's even simpler. There's nothing really that could go wrong. There's no plumbing or water pumps or seals. It's just the basic engine. And if you do the dias mod, if you rejet it properly and it doesn't run too lean, and you check the oil levels, then it shouldn't overheat. And I've heard of many riders doing long rides in the desert in very hot conditions like 40-45 degrees Celsius or above 100 Fahrenheit, I'm not sure the conversion, without any overheating issues. So if you maintain it properly, it shouldn't overheat. And then this bike is just much simpler, and there's much less that can go wrong without that radiator and hoses, etc. And it's less maintenance. The seventh thing that I love about the Honda XR650L over the KLR650 is the way that the rear wheel fits, and the way you adjust the tension of the chain. It's got these snails that you just rotate by hand, and you can see it's got a nice little numbering on there. So if you remove and refit different size sprockets, like I've got a 14 tooth front sprocket here, the stock is a 15, you can take it with, it's very easy to replace next to the road, campsite. So you can make little tick marks on the snails, and it's very easy to adjust very quickly. The Kawasaki is not difficult, but it's got that fiddly end cap on the box swing arm that you have to somehow, I just found it a little bit more fiddly. It's not an issue, but I just like that more about this bike. It's like an old dirt, like a proper dirt bike. Then the eighth thing that I love about the Honda XR650L over the KLR650 is the ground clearance. I mean, look at this. I think it's 33 inches of ground clearance because of this tall seat height and the long travel suspension. And I've done this in a previous video, and I'm going to do it again, but I couldn't crawl underneath my KLR like I'm going to do now. And I actually leopard crawled without touching, I did touch the ground a bit, but without sailing on the ground like a snake. And that is something I could not do on my Kawasaki KLR650. And that's what I love about this bike. I've never hit the bottom of the dash crash bar or whatever, the bottom of the frame or chassis before. So in the dirt, technical terrain, over bumps and stuff, this bike is just amazing. So thank you for watching, and let me know what you think about the KLR650 and the XR650L. If you have any of these bikes, let me know, and I'll see you next week.